The smell of fresh coffee filled the small diner, blending with the sizzling sound of bacon on the griddle. It was the kind of place where locals gathered every morning, greeting each other like family. But for Emily Carter, it wasn't just a diner. It was her battlefield, her survival ground, the place where she fought every single day to keep herself afloat. Emily had been working at Millie's Diner for 3 years, long shifts, low wages, and endless exhaustion. She knew the rhythm by heart. The morning rush, the late-night cleanup, the customers who left kind words, and the ones who barely noticed her presence. But what choice did she have?
She needed the job.
She needed the tips. At 27, Emily's life was far from what she had imagined. She had once dreamed of going to college, of becoming an artist, but those dreams had slipped away the moment her mother got sick. Medical bills piled up, and Emily had to drop out of school to take care of her. Then, when her mother passed away, Emily was left alone in a tiny, rundown apartment with nothing but debt and regret.
She didn't complain.
She couldn't. She woke up every morning, put on her uniform, tied her hair into a ponytail, and walked to the diner with a weary smile. She had learned to accept the struggles, to swallow the bitterness, and to serve every plate with the same forced enthusiasm. But deep down, there was a quiet desperation, an unspoken wish for something, anything, to change. She had no idea that today would be the day everything shifted. Today, she would serve a man who would push her patience to the limit. A man who would treat her like she was invisible. A man who would leave behind something that would shake her world. Emily didn't know it yet, but her life was about to change in a way she never imagined. The bell above the diner's door jingled as another customer walked in. Emily didn't even look up. She was too busy wiping down a table, her hands moving in a practiced rhythm. "Emily." "Table 6, her manager, Linda, called out from behind the counter. Emily grabbed her notepad and took a deep breath. The morning rush had been brutal, and she still had the lunch crowd to deal with. She forced a polite smile and made her way to the table. Sitting there was a man in his late 50s, wearing an expensive navy blue suit. His neatly combed salt and pepper hair and polished shoes screamed wealth. But the sharp frown on his face and the way he barely glanced at her told Emily everything she needed to know. He was one of those customers. The kind that snapped their fingers. The kind that never said please or thank you. The kind that left lousy tips if they left any at all. Emily knew how to handle difficult customers. She had dealt with plenty of them. The drunk businessmen who thought they were charming, the impatient mothers who acted like their kids were royalty, and the grumpy old men who thought they owned the place. "Good afternoon, sir. What can I get for you?" she asked, keeping her voice neutral. The man didn't even look at her. His eyes stayed glued to his phone as he spoke. "Coffee. Black. Hot." Emily bit the inside of her cheek. No please, no acknowledgement. Just demands. She nodded and walked away, her fingers tightening around the notepad. A few minutes later, she returned with a coffee, setting it down gently. The man took one sip and immediately scowled. "This is lukewarm." "I'm sorry about that," Emily said, though she knew for a fact it wasn't. She had just poured it fresh from the pot. "Bring me another," he said dismissively, pushing the cup away as if it were offensive. Emily nodded and turned back toward the counter, her patience already wearing thin. She poured a new cup, making sure it was steaming, and brought it back to him. This time, he didn't complain. He simply sipped the coffee and continued scrolling through his phone, as if she wasn't even there. Emily had half a mind to ignore him for the rest of his visit, but unfortunately, he wasn't done testing her patience. "Are you going to take my order or just stand there?" he snapped. Emily took a slow breath, forcing herself to stay professional. "Of course, sir. What would you like?" He finally looked up, his cold, gray eyes scanning the menu for barely a second before shutting it.
"Steak.
Medium rare. No seasoning. And I want it out fast." Emily hesitated. "I'm sorry, sir, but we only serve breakfast and lunch items. We don't have steak on the menu." The man let out a sharp sigh, shaking his head as if she had personally offended him. "Unbelievable." "Fine. A grilled cheese sandwich. No butter. No crust." And if it takes longer than 10 minutes, I'm not paying for it. Emily forced a tight smile and nodded. I'll get that right out for you. She turned and walked back toward the kitchen, muttering under her breath. Linda, who had been watching the entire exchange, smirked. Lucky you, she whispered. You got the charmer today. Emily rolled her eyes. Yeah, he's a real delight. She handed the order to the cook and leaned against the counter, rubbing her temples. Customers like him drained her. They made her wonder why she even bothered trying to be polite when it clearly didn't matter. But she needed this job. She needed the tips. So she swallowed her frustration, took a deep breath, and prepared herself to deal with the man for the rest of his meal. She had no idea that by the time he left, she would never see her life the same way again. Emily returned to the table just as the cook slid the grilled cheese onto the pickup counter. She grabbed the plate and carefully placed it in front of the man. Here you go, sir. A grilled cheese, no butter, no crust, she said in her usual polite tone. The man barely acknowledged her, giving the sandwich a quick glance before picking up one half and taking a small bite. His face remained unreadable. Emily waited for a complaint. She was sure he'd find something wrong with it. But instead, he simply chewed, swallowed, and continued scrolling on his phone. Let me know if you need anything else, she added, though she was secretly hoping he wouldn't. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. Wait. Emily stiffened. Here it comes. The complaint. The demand. She turned back, masking her frustration with a well-practiced neutral expression. Yes, sir? For the first time since he arrived, the man actually looked at her. His gaze was sharp, calculating. How long have you been working here? He asked, his tone almost curious. The question caught Emily off guard. It wasn't the usual small talk customers made when they actually cared. It felt more like an interrogation. About 3 years, she answered cautiously. He took another bite of his sandwich, chewing slowly as if considering his next words. Emily stood there awkwardly, unsure whether he wanted her to stay or if the conversation was over. But just as she turned to walk away again, he spoke. You seem tired. Emily froze. Of all the things he could have said, that was the last thing she expected. She let out a small, dry chuckle. Well, working double shifts at a diner 6 days a week will do that to you. The man didn't smile. He simply nodded, as if she had just confirmed something for him. And why do you do it? He asked. Emily blinked. Excuse me? Why are you here? He repeated. Most people don't spend 3 years in a job like this unless they have to. What's keeping you here? Emily hesitated. It wasn't that she didn't have an answer.
She did.
But it wasn't something she was used to talking about, especially not with rude customers who barely acknowledged her existence. Still, there was something about the way he asked, almost like he already knew the answer, like he was just waiting for her to say it out loud. She sighed.
Bills. Rent.
My younger brother's college tuition. Life, I guess. The man nodded again, as if he had expected that answer. No other options? Emily frowned. I didn't say that. Then why are you still here? Her patience was wearing thin. She didn't owe this man an explanation. He wasn't her friend. He wasn't even a decent customer. But before she could snap at him, Linda called her from across the diner. Emily, table 4 needs refills. Emily forced a tight smile. Excuse me. She turned and walked away, gripping the empty coffee pot a little too tightly. As she refilled the cups at table 4, she couldn't stop thinking about the man's questions. Why was she still here? She knew the answer. She was here because she had responsibilities. Because she couldn't afford to chase dreams. Because life wasn't fair, and sometimes you had to settle for survival instead of happiness. But the way he asked, it made her feel like she had made the wrong choice. Like there was another option. Like she was supposed to be more. She shook her head and pushed the thought away. The man finished his sandwich in silence, paid his bill in cash, and left without another word. Emily didn't think much of it. She had dealt with worse customers. At least he hadn't yelled at her or thrown a fit. But when she went to clear his table, she found something that made her heart stop. A stack of $100 bills, neatly placed beneath the coffee cup. And on top of it, a small folded note. Emily's hands trembled as she picked it up, her heart pounding. She unfolded the note and read the words written in neat, precise handwriting. You deserve better. Don't settle. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She quickly counted the bills. It was over $2,000. Her legs felt weak, and she had to grip the edge of the table to steady herself. Linda walked by and saw her expression. You okay? Emily could barely hear her. She was still staring at the note, her mind racing. Who was that man? And why had he done this? Emily stood frozen at the table, her fingers gripping the note as if it might disappear if she let go. The crisp $100 bills beneath it felt unreal. Emily. Linda's voice cut through her thoughts. Emily snapped her head up, quickly folding the note and stuffing it into her apron pocket. Linda's gaze fell on the cash. Her eyes widened. Holy! She lowered her voice. Did that guy just leave you all that? Emily swallowed hard and nodded. Linda let out a low whistle.
Damn.
Either he's got more money than sense, or you made one hell of an impression. Emily wasn't sure which was true. The man had been rude, cold, and distant. And yet he had left her this. Maybe it was a mistake, Emily murmured, though she didn't believe it. Linda raised an eyebrow. Girl, no one accidentally leaves that kind of money behind. That was meant for you. Emily stared down at the empty plate and coffee cup. The man was gone, and he hadn't left any contact information. She could feel the weight of the cash pressing against her through her apron pocket. This wasn't just a generous tip, it was a message. She didn't even realize she was shaking until she reached for the coffee pot again. Linda placed a firm hand on her shoulder.
Hey, take a break.
Go breathe for a minute. Emily hesitated, then nodded. She slipped into the back storage room, her mind racing. She pulled out the note again, reading the words over and over. You deserve better. Don't settle. She clenched the paper in her fist, her chest tightening. It wasn't the money that got to her, it was what it represented. For years, she had been stuck, working doubles, missing out on life, pushing her own dreams aside so she could take care of everyone else. But here was a stranger, someone who didn't even know her, telling her what she had been afraid to admit to herself. She was settling, and deep down she hated it. Tears stung her eyes as frustration bubbled up inside her. Because the truth was, she didn't want to be here forever. She had always dreamed of going to culinary school, of becoming a chef and opening her own restaurant someday. But dreams cost money. Dreams require time. And Emily had neither. Or at least, that's what she had always told herself. She pulled out the bills again, staring at them. $2,000. It wasn't enough to change her life overnight. But it was enough to start. Her heart pounded as a thought crept into her mind, one she had never dared to entertain before. What if she quit? The idea was terrifying. She had responsibilities. She couldn't just walk away from her job.
Could she?
She pressed the note to her chest, closing her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time.
Hope.
The rest of her shift passed in a blur. She couldn't focus. Her mind kept replaying the encounter with the stranger, the weight of the cash in her pocket reminding her that this wasn't a dream. By the time the diner closed, Emily had made a decision. She was going to find out who that man was. She needed to know why he had done this. So the next morning, she arrived early, hoping he would come back. But he didn't. She waited the next day. And the next. Nothing. Days turned into a week, and soon, Emily started to accept that she might never see him again. But the money was still there. And so was the note. Every night, she would pull it out and read it. You deserve better. Don't settle. Each time, the words seemed to dig a little deeper. Then, on the 8th day, something inside her snapped. She grabbed her phone and started searching. Culinary schools in the area. She had looked before, but she had never let herself seriously consider it. But this time, she wasn't just looking. She was planning. She found a part-time program that would let her work while studying. It wasn't cheap, but with the money the man had left her, she had enough for the first few months. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And for the first time in years, Emily felt like she was finally moving towards something that was hers. 1 week later, she walked into the diner with a letter in her hand. She found Linda by the coffee station and took a deep breath. "I'm quitting," she blurted. Linda nearly dropped the coffee pot.
Wait. What?
Emily handed her the letter. "I got into culinary school. I start next month." Linda's jaw dropped. "Holy Emily, that's amazing." Emily smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. "Are you sure about this?" Linda asked. Emily thought about the stranger, the note, the feeling in her gut that told her this was the right path. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," she said. That night, as she walked home, she whispered a silent thank you to the mysterious man who had changed everything. She might never know who he was, but she knew one thing for certain. He had given her more than just money. He had given her a new beginning. Emily's hands trembled as she held her acceptance letter. It still didn't feel real. She had spent so long putting her dreams on hold that actually stepping toward them felt like walking on unfamiliar ground. She had given her 2-week notice at the diner. Linda had hugged her tightly, promising to visit her once she was a world-class chef. Her co-workers had been supportive, though a few of them had been skeptical. "Are you sure you can afford this?" one of them had asked. Emily had swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "I'll figure it out." Because that was the truth. She had to figure it out. The money from the stranger was just enough to cover her enrollment fees and the first couple of months of tuition. After that, she would need a new job, one that fit around her classes. She started applying to restaurants, hoping to get a foot in the door as a kitchen assistant. She had no formal experience, but she had been working in diners for years. Surely, that counted for something. But rejection after rejection made her doubt herself. "We're looking for someone with more experience. We need someone who can work full-time. Try again next year." With every no, the fear crept back in. Had she made a mistake? Had she thrown away a steady paycheck for a dream that would never happen? She was starting to panic when she saw a small restaurant with a "Help Wanted" sign in the window. She almost didn't go inside. But then she thought of the note. "You deserve better. Don't settle." Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the door. The restaurant, La Petite Maison, was a cozy little place with dim lighting and the scent of garlic and butter wafting through the air. It was nothing like the diner. Here, everything felt intentional. A woman in a chef's coat stood behind the counter, watching Emily with curious eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked. Emily hesitated, then held up the flyer from the window. "I saw you're hiring. I don't have formal training yet, but I'm starting culinary school next month. I've been working in diners for years, and I'm a fast learner. I just need someone to give me a chance." The woman studied her for a long moment, then motioned for her to follow. "You know how to chop an onion?" Emily nodded. "Good. Let's see what you've got." By the end of the night, Emily's hands were sore, her back ached, and her apron was stained with flour and oil. But she had done it. She had worked in a real kitchen. And when the chef, Margot, clapped her on the back and said, "Come back tomorrow. Let's see if you can keep up," Emily nearly cried with relief. She wasn't just chasing her dream anymore. She was living it. The weeks that followed were exhausting. She woke up early for classes, spent hours practicing knife skills and plating techniques, then rushed to La Petite Maison to work the dinner shift. She barely had time to breathe, let alone think. But she loved it. She loved the adrenaline rush of a busy dinner service. She loved the way food could tell a story. She loved watching Margot create magic in the kitchen. She had never felt more alive. But it wasn't easy. The restaurant world was brutal. One mistake could send an entire order crashing down. One night, she accidentally oversalted a sauce, and Margot's sharp glare made her stomach twist. "You have to taste everything before you serve it," Margot said. I'm sorry." Margot sighed, then handed her a spoon. "Don't be sorry. Be better. Now fix it." Emily nodded and got to work. Because she wasn't going to quit. Not this time. One night, as she was closing up, Margot handed her an envelope. "Your first paycheck," she said. Emily's fingers tightened around it. She hadn't realized how much she had missed this feeling, earning something from her own hard work. She had been so afraid of failing that she had forgotten what it felt like to win. That night, she sat on her tiny apartment floor, staring at the envelope. It wasn't a lot, but it was hers. She pulled out the note from the stranger, smoothing it out with her fingers. "You deserve better. Don't settle." For the first time, she whispered back, "I won't." Months passed in a blur of hard work and long nights. Emily barely recognized the version of herself who had once been stuck in that diner, barely scraping by, afraid to dream of anything more. At La Petite Maison, she had learned more than just cooking techniques. She had learned how to handle the pressure of a busy kitchen, how to balance flavors, how to work as part of a team. She had learned that food wasn't just about feeding people, it was about creating an experience. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. One evening, after the dinner rush had settled, Margot called her into the office. "You've come a long way," Margot said, watching her carefully. Emily swallowed. Was this it? Was she about to be let go? "You remind me of myself when I was starting out," Margot continued. "Hungry, determined, stubborn as hell." She smirked, then slid a piece of paper across the desk. Emily's heart pounded as she picked it up. It was a letter of recommendation. "For an internship," she whispered. "Not just any internship," Margot said. "It's with one of the top restaurants in the city. They're looking for fresh talent. I think you're ready." Emily's hands trembled as she stared at the letter. Ready? She had spent so long doubting herself, waiting for someone else to tell her she was good enough. And now she finally believed it. A few days later, she found herself back at the diner, sitting at the counter where she had once spent years serving customers. Linda beamed as she poured her a cup of coffee. "Look at you," she said. "You've got that glow, honey. You did it, didn't you?" Emily smiled. "Not yet, but I will." She reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope, the first real tip she had ever earned, back at La Petite Maison. Linda frowned. "What's this?" Emily pushed it toward her. "For the next girl who comes in here, feeling stuck. Someone like me." Linda's eyes softened as she took the envelope. "You sure?" Emily nodded. "Someone once reminded me that I deserved better. Maybe it's time I passed that on." That night, Emily sat in her tiny apartment, staring at the note that had started it all. The note from the stranger. The note that had changed her life. She had no idea who he was, or why he had chosen to help her. But it didn't matter, because his kindness had set off a chain reaction, one that had led her here. One day, she'd do the same for someone else. She folded the note carefully, tucking it away. Then, with a deep breath, she picked up her phone and dialed the number for the restaurant offering the internship. When they answered, she didn't hesitate. "Hi," she said, her voice steady. "My name is Emily. I'm calling about the internship, and I'd love to apply." Because she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was chasing her dream. And this time, nothing was going to stop her.